As was mentioned, I'm Captain Brian Nanavaty. I retired in January. My hope for all of you is that you're as blessed as I am. The nice thing about retirement is waking up at 00001 on the 15th of every month and seeing a big dump of cash into my checking account. Problem is that being financially stable in retirement is only 1/3 of the equation. We get to retirement and many of us who spent 20, 30 years doing this job are not healthy and we're not happy. And that's an unfortunate equation that could be changed if we would take a look at better ways of helping our people get through their career. We spend most of our time talking about how to respond to officers when they're already in crisis. When you're waiting around for people to fail and then attach yourself to them to try to help them be successful, your percentage and your odds of helping them are slim and none. So what I'm going to talk to you about today for the next 30 or 40 minutes until we break for lunch is how to break that cycle, how to look at doing early intervention, and how to develop your people from the first day of hire. You'll notice if you look at your program, it says PTSD and suicide prevention. I'm not a big fan of people who take their show on the road and talk about how to avoid officers killing themselves. Usually they come in, they've got a great story to tell, something based on their life's experience, and that's fine. They're very courageous for doing that. But if they don't tell you when you leave, if they don't give you some type of objective or some learning objective that you can leave and go back to your agency with or go back to your family with to help you achieve health throughout your career and at home, then they really haven't done what they set out to do. A lot of people have good stories, but good stories they last as long as the training. So I hope to impart to you today is something that's proactive rather than reactive. And this is not something that I read in a textbook or read in a study. Our program in Indianapolis was started in 2010, and to date we've worked with over 1,000 police officers in some type of crisis, whether it's personal crisis or professional crisis. And you can't separate the two. What goes on at home, officers are going to bring to work. What happens at work, they're going to take home. My Money Wellness is a group that studies officers in financial distress, and they estimate based on their work with officers that 92% of law enforcement officers stress over finances. If you don't think those officers are bringing that stress to work, then you have your head buried in the sand. But when I talk to most chiefs and executives of agencies, they will tell you, well, it's not my place to do financial training for officers. They should learn how to manage their money. And I agree with you 100%. But the problem is, the reality is if they're bringing that stress to work, then it is your problem, especially as a retired officer. When I call 911 or I want the police to come, I want the officer who's knocking on my door to be healthy, as opposed to the one who's unhealthy and carrying a lot of baggage. And there are reasons for this. So we're going to talk about how we arrive at where we arrive at with officers in the front page of USA Today and showing up on the 6 o'clock news for things that in most cases could have been prevented. So this is who I am. My bio's already been read, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Yes, the Attorney General was dispatched by the White House in May of last year. There was some good and some bad. Anytime you deal with politicians, especially those in Washington, D.C., it's a life's experience that you typically would not want to repeat. And those people who were in the unit with me at that time, who were in the back row, know exactly what I'm talking about. So before I tell my Attorney General's story, I'd like to introduce them. First Lieutenant Sherry Horn, please stand up and be recognized. Sergeant John Baker, Sergeant Aaron Snyder, who is on the committee who put this together today, and Officer Nicole Jude. Officer Nicole Jude actually is serving on the committee with John Vellante, the committee that morphed off of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, to show you how far we've gotten in recognition with what we've done in Indianapolis. Again, it went all the way to the White House, and now Officer Jude serves on that committee. I would also like to recognize Kathy Cardwell, who is our EAP case manager. We wouldn't be where we're at today without a comprehensive program and a working relationship with our EAP. As I go on the road and travel and train, which I do with regularity, I'm on the road 52 weeks a year, one of the biggest complaints I get is either agencies don't have an EAP or they tell me their EAP stinks. And I say, well, what are you doing to change that dynamic? Well, what do you mean? What are we doing? Our EAP stinks. Our officers don't trust him. I said, well, you need to control that experiment. You're the client, right? Well, why don't you interact? Have you contacted your EAP? Have you asked to speak to them? Have you asked to set up some type of cooperative relationship? I don't know what it is about those of us in our profession, but we like to complain before we think creatively on ways we can resolve issues. And I'm telling you, for everything that you think is a speed bump, there's a resolution to it. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about the Attorney General coming to Indianapolis is we did this program and worked with almost 1,000 officers for 6 years without a budget. So I really am not open to complaints from agencies that tell me, well, you know, you're Indianapolis, you have a big budget, you've got 1 million people, you've got 600 officers. We were selling baked goods and calendars and trying to raise money to help officers. And if you're familiar with the cost of putting an officer into treatment today, whether for mental health or substance abuse issues, it's about $1,000 a day. And that's even with a decent insurance. And now you're looking at 30, 45, 60 days. So these things cost money. So the nice thing about the Attorney General coming to town was it wasn't within a couple of weeks where people couldn't do enough for me. Our city councilors, our mayor, our chief, everybody wanted to help us be successful in this program. So we finally got our first budget after 6.5 years of running this program. Now on the flip side, I had some great discussions with the Attorney General about some of the things that were coming out of the White House. One being it didn't pass notice that the reason that the Attorney General was coming to the White House was because the Obama administration didn't have that great a reputation with the law enforcement community. In fact, after Indianapolis, she was on her way to Portland, a city that was under consent decree, where in Indianapolis, we give our officers 48 hours for their brain to heal before we start our officer-involved shooting investigations. The consent decrees in Portland and other cities ordered that those agencies have their investigations completely wrapped up in 48 hours. Now think about that. We've talked today about how trauma affects the brain, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But think about an officer who's just been involved in a shooting, dealing with the trauma of that, dealing with the administrative process, dealing with what's going on at home. And we're going to order that investigation be wrapped up in 48 hours. The problem is that officers they're not able to focus on anything other than the threat when that incident occurs. And we know that because we've interviewed over 200 officers post-shooting. We know what occurs to them. And I said, Madam Attorney General, it's unconscionable that you would ask these investigations to be wrapped up within 48 hours. The officer's brain hasn't even begun to heal. She said, I acknowledge that, but we also have a responsibility to the public. So it was an interesting day spent with her and her people. But the nicest thing that came out of that day was her request that she meet with some of our officers that we had helped over the course of that 6.5 years. So I contacted 12 officers and their spouses, significant others, thinking that if I contacted 12 and asked them to meet with the Attorney General, I would get maybe 2 that would agree to do that. Because of our culture, we don't like to talk about our challenges and those things that make us look weak. And what happened was all 12 said, yeah, we'd be happy to. We'd be happy to. See, my point here today is, and somebody mentioned it earlier during the panel discussion, the first thing that's got to happen is you have to change the culture of your agency. We wouldn't be as successful in Indianapolis as we are if we didn't change the culture. You have to have that trust. You have to have confidentiality. You also have to have a track record of helping people be successful, and that'll come. It's the snowball that turns into an avalanche if you do things the right way. See, officers can see through BS. They absolutely have a BS meter. And so all 12 officers said, yeah, we'll be there. And then about a week later, I get a call from one of her handlers that says, yeah, I probably left this out. It's probably an important point, but she travels with a Washington Post reporter embedded with her. And oh yeah, there'll be TV cameras there. So I said, oh, thanks for telling me now. So I called all 12 officers again, thinking, yeah, they're gonna bail out. I wouldn't feel comfortable talking, knowing that my story about how I get angry and attack my kids or my wife, or that I drink myself into oblivion, or I'm afraid to go to work, all the myriad of issues that officers face during the course of their career. I certainly wouldn't want that to be in a major news publication. And to their credit, all 12 said, no, we're still committed. You see, if we don't talk about these things, then we don't recognize that these are challenges that we all face. And if we don't recognize these are challenges we all face, then we don't develop resources for them. And therein lies the problem. And see, that's what we've been able to overcome in Indianapolis. I used to call myself the P.T. Barnum of officer wellness because really I didn't do anything except I put up a tent. And we brought in resources like Kathy Cardwell at EAP, and we matched resources to need. You know, we had people selling popcorn, and we had lion tamers and all those things you need in the periphery, but we were able to match resource to need and do it in an environment that was therapeutic. And we got the agency on board, we got the union on board, because you need everybody on the bus. You're not gonna be able to do this. So when I travel to the East Coast where they have very powerful unions, the unions will say, the administration there, let's do that. And when I travel to the hinterland where they right to work state, you know, they'll argue a different argument. Or maybe I'll travel and I'll be speaking to sheriffs and chiefs, and they'll say, well, you know, the unions won't let us do this. We'll see what happened in Indianapolis. About the time we started this program, a gentleman named Dave Bizard ran into 3 motorcyclists and killed 1. 2 ended up never being able to walk again. And the city paid out millions of dollars in liability. But the union also spent hundreds of thousands of dollars defending Dave Bizard, only to find out he was about, 2.5, 3 times the legal limit that day when he came into work. And you can't keep paying that kind of money. Again, I go back to crisis intervention. Crisis intervention is like climbing an 8,000 meter peak. K2, Everest, you tell me. You get to 8,000 meters, your body is basically dying. That's why people die on those mountains. That's what it's like to interact or intervene with somebody who's in crisis. And that's what we do. Peer support, great people, dedicated people. But when are they responding? They're responding to critical incidents. They're responding to people in crisis. That's what we do. We wait for our people to fail, and then we respond to them. And many agencies don't even have peer support. And then who's doing peer support? Volunteers, because we don't have policies. Who's attracted to doing peer support? Same people who are attracted to our profession, people that want to help. Some of those people don't have what's necessary to help. We attract people to this helping profession who are embroiled in all kinds of drama in their life, all kinds of drama. And that's why they want to help other people, because it's therapeutic to help other people. It also helps them to ignore the drama in their own life. So we end up attracting unhealthy people to this profession, and then they spend 20, 30 years doing unhealthy things, and then lo and behold, we expect them to retire healthy, and that's just not going to happen. So what's a better way of doing business? A better way of doing business is to read Kevin Gilmartin and study what John Vellante and others are doing and say, let's get to officers early. In fact, let's do better than early. Let's interact with them from the first day of hire, because we can't keep seeing the numbers that we're seeing. And this is partly why I'm honored to be on the same stage as John Vellante, because John's been a pioneer in what we've been trying to espouse for decades. But he's just a lone voice like Kevin Gilmartin crying in the wilderness if we're not going to pay attention to him. If you've been to Kevin Gilmartin's training, and I'm blessed, I do a joint training with Kevin. Kevin does the first day, I do the second day. So I have the opportunity to talk to Kevin. And I'm able to ask him questions other people can't ask him. Like, how many books have you sold, Kevin? Oh, a lot. A lot. What kind of impact have you had on this profession? Very little. Now, we have agencies that are buying this book, Emotional Survival, for all their recruits. We have agencies passing it out to entire departments. And Kevin Gilmartin will tell you, I published this book 15 years ago. I haven't had that much influence on it. So what do we see? What do we see with our people when we get to retirement? This is who I didn't want to be in retirement. Somebody who had to put a uniform back on and keep working, unless that was my choice. But in many cases, it's not their choice. Then you get to retirement, what's happened? Physically, you have health issues. The day I retired from IMPD, my insurance went from 80% city to 20% me to 50-50. This is what we do to our people after retirement. Give us your best years, and then at retirement, get on the computer and find affordable health care. Good luck to you. Good luck to you. There are agencies that have fully paid health for their officers. There are those agencies out there, and then there's agencies that don't even provide health for their active officers. And these are some of the arguments we're making in Washington, D.C. Why aren't we providing health care coverage for our people, good health care coverage? Why aren't we encouraging our people to a healthy embodiment during their career and then allow them to retire with their health intact? Because remember, I talked about the 3-sided retirement triangle. Physical health is one side of that triangle. Financial health is the other side of that triangle. And then psychological, emotional health is the third part of that triangle. You have to have all three if you're going to retire healthy and happy. This is a comic that was given to me by an officer who struggled with PTSD after the death of his partner that he witnessed. He said, occasionally people would ask me, you doing okay? They would recognize things were wrong. But what do we tell everybody? I'm okay. I'm a cop. I deal with this stuff all the time. See a dead body, go buy a pizza. We talk stuff like that. I was in training yesterday in Michigan. And the officer said, I got involved in an officer involved shooting. They went out and bought a sandwich, Another day at the office. And I cornered him during break. And I said, you're on your peer support team? Oh, yeah. I said, do you talk to officers post-shooting like that? Tell them after your shooting you went and got a sandwich another day at the office? Because if I'm a guy in a shooting and you tell me your story, I'm going to be afraid to tell you that I'm struggling, that I'm not sleeping at night, that I'm self-medicating, that I'm angry. I'm not going to share it with you because you've convinced me that I'm supposed to be okay after a critical incident. Our profession has never been okay after critical incidents. My generation self-medicated. Generation X went off and did their own thing. Baby boomer, or the millennials, our ADHD generation, it rocks their world when they're involved in incidents. And not only rocks their world, it rocks their family's world. Millennials are married to millennials, or they're in relationships with millennials. And those millennials are saying, not again. I'm not getting that call at 3 a.m. You go tell your chief we're going to move to North Carolina and you're going to join the Mayberry Police Department where they don't even carry weapons. Or you're going to go to work for my dad in the lumber mill. We're not doing this anymore. And that's why we're losing people. And we mentioned earlier, in the earlier session, it's hard enough to get people. I think you mentioned that, Chief. We're all competing for that same person, and we're not attracting them. And the interesting thing about millennials is, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, millennials want to self-actualize. They want to serve. They have this great need to serve. They're volunteering at numbers that are off the charts. So why aren't they attracted to our profession? Isn't that what we do? We're not attracting them, and then when we do attract them, we don't keep them. So we're constantly in hiring cycles. And part of it is because we have blinders on. What do we tell the younger kids? We tell them, hey, this is a 100-year model of modern American policing. We're not going to change it for you or your generation. You come fit in our organization. You think they tell them that at Microsoft and Zappos and Google, Netflix? Do yourself a favor and Google Netflix PowerPoint, 120 some slides on their hiring philosophy. They will pay you to leave. If they hire Aaron Snyder, they will go 3 months later and say, here's a check for $5,000, we'd like you to leave. And Aaron's either going to say, no, I love it here, he's going to take the $5,000 and run. And they justify that by saying, we only want people to stay here that want to be here. We want to hire stars, we want all stars in every position. Imagine if we hired like that in law enforcement. And then we partnered with our people to help them survive their career. And we did a better job of looking at who we're hiring. See, the nice thing about what we're doing in Indianapolis is we're not just helping officers, we created a knowledge base of who's failing. And then we can push that back into the hiring process. And it's not rocket science. We're not hiring healthy people. Oh, they're healthy in the academy, and they'll survive a couple of years. But see, then that boat anchor just keeps getting heavier and heavier and heavier. Don't we wonder why, man, he's Officer of the Year at year 5, year 7, he's divorced, drinking. What happened? What happened? Great guy. What happened? See, we're all hired with some type of baggage. And I'm not saying that you can't be successful with this baggage. These are officers that we've worked with. These are the things that we see. These are the things that if you don't work on what your challenges are, that anchor becomes heavier and heavier and heavier. Because we know we're going to experience things during the course of our career. I don't care what agency you work for, you're going to experience things that are going to keep you awake at night, that you're going to obsess over, that are going to appear to you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whether you want them or not. The question is, can you cope with that? I have things that I've seen in my 30 years that pop into my head all the time. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I could be waiting on my flight at an airport. But the key is I've lived a healthy lifestyle. I practice stress inoculation. I do things to help keep me healthy. And so I'm able to cope with them. And cope is the key word here. We don't teach our people how to cope with what they're going to experience in their career. And many of them don't even know what they're going to experience. They watch an episode of Cops, or they go on a riding assignment, or their mom and dad are cops but only bring the good stories home. And they're convinced that they're going to have 30 years of fun and games. It's not 30 years of fun and games. You people know that. You know it isn't. We have fun. I mean, I'm blessed. This career has put my kids through college. It paid for my retirement. I mean, I'm not complaining. But we experience things that are unique. And we just expect that people are going to rebound from those regardless of what goes on in their head. We have people we hire that hide things really well. I'm going to show you our 10th recruit class here in a little bit. Now, this recruit class was sold to me as being squeaky clean. Best class we've hired in a while. No issues at all. Wait till I show you what they provided to me. But my point is that many people are at a crossroads in their career. They hit that fork in the road. And they're either going to be lost or they're going to climb the mountain and self-actualize. They're going to be disillusioned or we're going to help them develop. Now, some people get to that fork in the road and they go down the wrong path and they come back. That happens. Not every, I worked for 33 years. That's about 12,000 days. Not every one of those 12,000 days was a great day at work. You have your moments. But I go back to what I said earlier. Best bang for our buck is being proactive rather than reactive. What do I mean by that? I mean, when your ability to cope starts to decline over the course of your career and you start experiencing things in your career and those lines cross, when you're in the death zone, we've waited too long. Let's get to people early on. What do I mean by that? Let's start recognizing signs. Let's teach our people to look for those red flags. But again, even better than that is let's attach positive programs to people the first day, because we know they're going to experience stress and trauma during the course of their 8, 10, 12-hour day. We talk about PTSD. Now, I'm a little different. I have been involved in disability pensions. We've worked with a lot of officers. Trauma is real. Let's put that out there first. But I don't believe it exists to the levels in our profession that we have people lining up in front of disability boards or pension boards wanting to get out the door. I mean, we have our share. We've all experienced trauma one way or another. Again, it comes down to our ability to cope and our ability to process that. When we see the manifestations of that trauma or that stressful experience, and sometimes you can't recover from it. Like I said, some instances of trauma that occur on the job are very real. And then we see the after effects of it. Depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, on and on and on and on. These are all things you've seen before. But I've read all kinds of studies. I'm just going to quote you here too today. I don't know whether you think those numbers are high or not. I mean, they're higher than we want them to be. But think about something that we all watch. We all love historical drama, don't we? So we've all seen Band of Brothers, and they all came home. The ones that came home and they raised their kids. They went to church on Sundays. They showed up for work every day. Trauma is survivable. Kathy Cardwell will tell you that. There's all kinds of good resources out there. And usually the people that were pushing a disability pension are the ones that didn't get resources right away. Many agencies don't have resources. I get calls all the time to interact with officers. Officers that didn't get any resources, they're 3-4 years beyond an incident. And when they tell you their story, it's as if it happened earlier that morning because the agency didn't have resources or they didn't know what to do. So again, there's 3 ways you can respond. You can wait around for crisis. You can intervene early, but this involves education. This involves knowing what signs to look for, or you can develop your people from the first day of hire. And that's what we do in Indianapolis. We create partnerships with our people. We create partnerships. We help them create partnerships at home. We don't wait around for peer support to respond to somebody in crisis. Like I said, these are good people. These are honorable people. They mean well. But if that's all you have, then you have to start developing other programs. Now we have a chaplaincy program. That's great. Chaplaincy programs are wonderful. They've helped a lot of people. Keep going. Wellness is holistic. Don't just stop there. Well, we do an annual physical. Okay, keep going. Keep going. What do we mean by early intervention? Well, early intervention, even if you're just looking at it from a bean counter standpoint, it's cheaper. This is a graph I created so you understand that. If you look, you'll see people that are voluntary entries, people that are mandatory entries. You're always going to have people that are disciplined or that have a pattern of issues, and there's going to be a mandatory accountability. But I use that word accountability because that's really what we're after. I would advocate, and the chief mentioned earlier, we reduced disciplinary referrals by 40%. I believe we can reduce discipline by 40%. And people say, oh, that's crazy talk, Captain. What do you mean? They always have to have the option of discipline. Yeah, you do. You do. But what are we really after when we discipline? Is it meant to be punitive or is it meant to be corrective? At the very least, it should be an element of both. So what we do in Indianapolis is we focus on accountability. You'll see where a supervisor can intervene and refer an officer to resources, and they're not being disciplined. Imagine that. Get to them early enough before you need to discipline them and get them help, be proactive, correct what it is that needs to be correct, and get them back to work healthy. Because what we're really after is accountability. Do all the paperwork you want. And ultimately, if somebody doesn't invest in themselves and they need to be disciplined, you discipline them. But discipline tends to be our only tool in the toolbox. That and not doing anything. I call it terrible T's. We go from tolerating to terminating because we don't understand the intervening steps. And there's plenty of intervening steps if you're creative enough. Employee development is partnering with your people. What do we mean by that? Developmental programs help your people get through their careers. It helps guide them. It gives us worth or value, which is very important. People want to feel like they're valued at work. It shows the agency cares. There's a University of Delaware study from 1997 that says if you show that you support your people, morale is better, productivity is better, behaviors are better, attendance is better. Isn't this what we're after? This is what we want. And the interesting thing about that University of Delaware study is it's not on actual support, it's on perceived support. So you don't even really have to mean it. Just do something that makes it look like you care about your people. Put a suggestion box on the supervisor's table, something. Show that you care about your people. They help us attract quality applicants, and in this day and age, it's interesting, we're so focused on millennials, we don't even realize that Generation Z graduated from college last May. So millennials are going to be passé here in a few years, and we're just beginning to think we understand them. That shows you how far behind we are in our profession. And here's an interesting thing about Generation Z, and I say this in all seriousness. Time Magazine did an article on this 2 months ago. They don't even know what sex they are. Now think about police departments. We're still operating in the 1950s. Can you imagine if you have a Generation Z applicant who looks at the form and says, yeah, we're only giving me two choices there, M or F. Yeah, I can't check either one of those boxes. How do you think the grizzled veteran in human resources is going to respond to that? Well, we don't even know how to deal with millennials. We've got an interesting future ahead of us when it comes to attracting young people to fill our retirements. So what we've done in Indianapolis is we've created a formal mentoring program. And if you're interested in this program, please talk to somebody from the unit. Is that where the party is after the symposium? Great, great. The thing about mentoring is that it's practiced every day in the private sector. 25 to 28% of private companies have mentoring programs. I've counted less than 10 law enforcement agencies that have formal mentoring programs. I'm not saying 10%, I'm saying less than 10. We're missing the boat on developing our people. But I've had agencies tell me, well, we have an FTO program. They kind of mentor our people. No, they don't. They evaluate your people, and it's short term. Now, your probationary officer may form a relationship with your FTO at some point, but that's not the intention of it. Well, we have peer support. Yes, peer support in its ideal form is supposed to be short in duration and responding to a crisis. This isn't development. Peer support is not development. And if you're working with somebody longer than about 2 weeks, you're not doing peer support right. You're going to burn out your peer support officers because they're going to be working with your short-term people and your long-term people, and then they'll be the one in crisis. This is why you need to create a separate unit, voluntary, not voluntary, but formally trained, to work with your people, to help them develop. Other things we do in Indianapolis, we do a lot of education. I mentioned earlier financial literacy. We do quarterly financial training for our people. We brought in Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. This Prudential Pathways program, they'll come in with a free program, a 4-day program, invite spouses, significant others. There are things that you can do. There are people in your own backyard that will help you. So what happens if we are not proactive? This is what happens. You know, Dave Grossman uses the analogy of filling up a bathtub, and that bathtub is your stress, and you got to pull out the stopper every now and then. I like using the cup analogy. You know, we have officers who we say, oh, they're doing great. Yeah, they're doing great because they're one of the first 3 cups. And then 6 months later, they're screaming at a 80-year-old lady over dogs knocking over garbage cans. And we say, man, they got through that shooting. It was textbook. What did they get all worked up over this old lady for? It's because they haven't emptied that cup along the way.
Well, we've all been there, that moment when you feel like you're so hungry that you feel like your stomach is collapsing in on itself and your hands start trembling. The last thing you want to do is listen to the long fast food line. Fast is in the name after all. But one off-duty police officer in Georgia was so upset about how long it was taking for him to get his food that, get this, he actually pulled out his gun and threatened the person who was ordering food ahead of him. It was all caught on camera as well. Detective Sergeant Scott Phoebe is from the DeKalb County Police Department. He was in McDonald's drive-thru when he got out of his truck and approached an 18-year-old man when he began yelling at him for taking too long to order his food. After pulling out his...
Now, we've all been in that drive-thru line behind that minivan full of 8-year-olds. It's a birthday party, and they're ordering Happy Meals, and you think about going up and pointing your gun on them, but you don't. See, that's the difference. And it's interesting, I did some training in Georgia. So in one of my training classes, I had the detective who investigated this, and I had a member from this individual's county sheriff's department. And it was interesting because they said, you know, that kid was a real a-hole. And I'm thinking, all he did was have a .40 caliber weapon pulled in his face. I mean, but that's what we do. We line up behind our people. And I'm telling you right now, we all know this. We may not want to admit it, but if it hadn't been on video, we would have believed the officer's version of the story. And as it turned out, this officer was having all kinds of relationships at home, was completely stressed out, and brought that stress to the fast food drive-thru. Do we have an obligation to match need with resource? Maybe you don't think we do. The problem is it manifests over time. You probably don't know any police officers that have stomach issues or migraines or weight issues or anger issues. Yeah, we all know somebody like that, and maybe some of us in this room. This is how it manifests itself. So anything you see in green is a survey I did of officers in our agency, all 1,600, and over half said they had experienced symptoms of overwhelming stress, not garden variety stress, but overwhelming stress. And overwhelming stress leads to distress, and distress is costly to an organization and an individual. What do I mean by that? Distress is immediate and needs to be handled immediately. People don't schedule their distress. Hey, Captain, you got some time Friday afternoon? I'm going to have a huge meltdown, so if you could set aside 60, 90 minutes for me, really appreciate it. No, it happens right when the Super Bowl is kicking off. Aaron and I, foot of snow on the ground, and we have an officer sending us texts alluding to the fact that he's going to take his own life. I mean, this is when stuff happens. This is when stuff happens. They don't work around your schedule. It's debilitating, it's deadly if left untreated. We know the statistics. We're losing too many officers. And who are they? They are male, mid-career, midlife, single. So we're all trained investigators here, right? So we should realize that relationships play a big part in the self-worth of an individual that might lead to them thinking about harming themselves. Because when I survey our officers, these are the 2 biggest issues. You see PTSD way down on the list. Trauma's way down on the list. It's relationship distress and our stress response. 2 things we can control. Stress is not a circumstance. Stress is the way you respond to circumstance. It's something you have complete control over. You have control over your investment in your family. This is a wonderful book by Schneidman, and it says the same thing. Most self-harm cases are related to relationship issues. We've seen them, we've read them time after time. This is a New York officer thought he read some things on his girlfriend's Facebook. He's confronting her in the street. Next thing you know, he pulls the gun on himself. And one of the things we say in every case, unblemished record, didn't recognize any issues. Nobody saw this coming. We say that every time. Please don't tell me that this person was healthy and that it just one incident. I mean, I suppose it can happen, but the number of officers in crisis that we've worked with, all the signs are there. And I'm not blaming anybody for not recognizing the signs. What I'm saying is we have to create a culture where this person steps forward and says, I'm not doing well. I've had officers who have cloned their spouse's iPhone. You know, it's possible to do that. So you can read all their messages, see all their calls. Yeah. Now, is that a healthy person who does that? No. That's a person who's in a relationship crisis. 70% of our officers say they've experienced relationship, family, or financial distress. 70%. And I'm telling you that if you have an officer who's in a toxic situation at home, trying to resolve other issues like alcoholism, mental health issues, you've got to attack the family toxicity first because you have to create a support system. So here's some early warning signs while we're on the topic of self-harm. These are all good things to look for, but I add a few things based on the number of officers we worked with. And the biggest thing is this issue of self-worth and esteem, especially with millennials. If they come into work and they tell you things aren't good at home, you can't ignore them like in my generation. Those of you from my generation, the 1980s, our response was, oh, hey kid, all cops get divorced 3 or 4 times, just roll with it, you'll meet somebody else, let's go get a beer. I mean, seriously, I know I say that in a funny manner, but that's how we responded. You can't respond like that anymore. This is a different generation, and they react differently. It rocks their world, and they don't know what to do. You know, there's a line from the movie Jerry Maguire, where Tom Cruise comes in at the end and professes his love to Renee Zellweger, and what does he say? You complete me. Well, do the math. If it takes somebody else to complete you, you're not complete. And this is what we see in relationships. I mean, let's do Jerry Maguire 2. 3 years later, Renee Zellweger has had enough of Tom Cruise. She packs up the kid and her stuff and moves out. He's incomplete again. And what does he do with that? How does he react to that? Well, if you're a 15-year cop who thinks that you have nowhere to turn and your life's over, how are you going to respond? How are you going to respond? There's a difference between healthy individuals and unhealthy individuals, and this is why we like to focus on healthy individuals. So I know it's time for lunch, so let me get through these. But again, the 5 areas where we see the most crisis at home and at work are addictive issues, mental health issues, general health issues, which we spent some time today talking about, personality behavior issues. This is esteem, anger, control. Anybody know a narcissist in their department? Yeah. We have a lot of people who think that the solar system revolves around them. And you have somebody that is always embroiled in drama. Now, it's not covered in the DSM, it's not a clinical diagnosis, but we know people who always have some kind of drama going on. And when they don't, they will fabricate it. They will create drama. We got these people in our ranks too. So here's some statistics from 2014 from the officers. We were about 150 at that time. We were doing about 150 a year. And Kathy Cardwell would tell you that she's seen, I think, over 1,000 officers over a 5-6 year period, and the predominant issue is family, relationship, marital issues. We got a lot of issues going on at home that need to be addressed. Now, remember I told you that squeaky clean recruit class? I had them do this exercise. I said, here's your categories, write down your biggest challenge. Now, this is not scientific, so I'm not going to pretend it is. But in the very first week, I said, look, this is what I do at IMPD. We're here to help you. We're creating a culture of health. We need to identify resources to match with your need. Write down your most predominant pressing need. And you can see, look at the mental health. ADHD, emotional issues, depression, anxiety. But look at the family relationship toxicity. Bankruptcy, divorce, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And this was the class that was told to me by our human resources. And they're good people. They're good, thorough people. This is the squeaky clean recruit class. Now, the average age is 25 years old in this class. Are they going to be able to survive 20 or 30 years with what they're going to experience? That's the question we have to answer. So if we're going to help them, it's a four-legged stool. We'll do this and we'll get out of here. You have to have the right people on the bus. That's everybody. People ask me, how do you get workers' comp on the bus? Because you show them how you can save them money by doing things right the first time. You have a couple cases like that, they'll line up to help you. Look at what your crisis areas are and then fill in those green ovals. Internal programs, external programs, support at home. And for me, it all boils down to case management. Remember the big tent, P.T. Barnum? You use your EAPs as your case managers. You develop a relationship with them, you help them understand the unique perspective of the law enforcement officer, and you work very closely with them and you manage your officers back to health. You do the organizational management, they do the clinical management. We use the team approach to help officers get back to work healthy. But we mentioned this earlier, officers have to be in it for the long haul. You can help many of them, but then they become their own doctors and they say, well, you know what? I go to AA and I'm tired of listening to them talk about Jesus and God. I don't really need that anymore. Plus, I found I can handle 1 or 2 beers. This from the officer who we found the box of wine in the trunk of his car with the big long straw. Yeah, or I don't need my Zoloft anymore. I'm feeling pretty good. Well, you're feeling pretty good because you're on the Zoloft. So let's roll with it for a while. I don't need to go to EAP. Where you get those officers that go because they can check a box. Well, I did everything you asked me. I went to all my appointments. Yeah, you went to all your appointments, but there's more than just going to your appointments. You actually have to do the homework that is given to you or you're not going to be healthy. Because then they end up back in crisis again and you're dealing with them again. The average number of days it takes to build a new habit, it's painful. We don't have a drug for everything. It's going to take some work. So just a couple of things before we break. Please feel free to follow up with anybody in our unit. We will help you do everything we can to do what we did in Indianapolis. If you're interested in training, there's some training brochures out there. My card is out there on that table. Grab the card. I'm not quick about getting back, but I will get back to you. I'm on the road a lot. I'm involved in a lot of national committees and things. I do what I can. But we will help you if you're interested in partnering with your people and helping them get through their careers successfully. And there's my information. Thank you very much for your time.